all hell breaks loose. Diablo is a game that needs no introduction, but I'm going to have to try. Imagine a world before Diablo, where the stage is set for an exciting shakeup of the PC RPG genre. They had fallen from their popularity peak, overtaken by the new king, the fast-paced first-person shooter. Overwhelmed by explosive jibs and thrash metal, one game is ready to fight back, championing the return of the RPG into the mainstream of PC gaming. Hype is running high amongst the media, the company name is associated with excellence, yet behind the scenes, several juvenile developers are stressing away at Blizzard North's headquarters, having just missed their Christmas deadline. Diablo is the antithesis of modern-day hype culture that more often than not ends in disappointment. Had this game been set to release in recent times, you would expect this story to end in an unfinished project or a degree of mediocrity that even the sunk cost fallacy could not prop up. Influential cannot even hope to describe Diablo's domination of the action role-playing genre. Its impact was such that said genre has come to be more commonly referred to for Diablo-style isometric dungeon crawlers than for the games that birthed its definition. 2 decades later, and the titles it inspired are still referred to as Diablo clones. Even the games in its own franchise cannot compete with the adoration it, and especially its sequel, garnered. To rip off Patrician TV's Outer Worlds essay, the literature and resources that surround games are a good indicator of their success. Diablo is frankly one of the most documented games in history. Its Wikipedia page alone is a shrine indicating the devotion of its fanbase. Entire publications have been written covering its history, and its developers still, rightfully, ride its coattails to this day. When fan-made guides contain every single statistic down to the extreme minutiae, you know that a game has left an impact on its audience. Rarely does a game like this get overshadowed. Still, Diablo 2 was able to achieve all of Diablo's accolades and more, cementing itself as the pillar that bears the load of the Diablo franchise to this day. The game that, like Morrowind to the Elder Scrolls, fans will always refer to when criticizing other products within the series. Through no fault of its own, Diablo has been overlooked, but it shouldn't be. I am here to crusade on its behalf, to argue why it's worth taking the time to play it, even when others may claim it's too old or basic compared to its sequels. Through the help of GOG and now from Blizzard's Battle.net storefront, Diablo can be run on modern machines with little issue. While I appreciate and oftentimes prefer the retro aesthetic of older titles, without the CRT monitors that Diablo was designed for, my personal preference is to update these visuals just a tad, usually with the goal of playing the game in the widescreen aspect ratios and higher resolutions best suited for our modern day peripherals. That said, authenticity to the original product always takes paramount over additional bells and whistles, and it is oftentimes rare that fan-made patches are able to maintain this veracity as they seek so-called total improvement. Beelzebub is the most common recommendation for new players to Diablo, but it is unfair to both the game and the mod's developers to use that version for this extensive deep dive. Despite being referred to as a HD mod, its changes fundamentally alter the game to the point that I would rather advocate for new players to stick to the vanilla version. If you have no issue with low resolutions and the black bars, then vanilla is a perfectly suitable way to experience Diablo. However, it is plagued by a few problems resulting from the age of its executable being ran within a newer version of Windows, such as instability with alt-tabbing. For most new players though, I would recommend running Diablo using the Devolution X engine rewrite. This mod replaces Diablo's original engine, running the game natively on modern operating systems. High resolutions are rendered properly, and a series of graphical improvements can be switched on and off to highly customize the visual experience while maintaining the vintage aesthetic of the original release. A big criticism of Beelzebub is how it replaced Diablo's dungeon lighting to reflect Diablo 2, and in the process removed much of the atmosphere many loved. Devolution X maintains that classic lighting, making this the ideal way to combine the classic ambiance with a contemporary aspect ratio. The quality of life improvements that make Beelzebub more pleasant for new players are still present in Devolution X 2 and are entirely optional. The customizability of Devolution X makes it the clear best way to play Diablo. Even if you prefer the OG 4:3 ratio and 480p resolution, you can still run the game this way through Devolution X, while taking advantage of its quality of life additions. One must critique a medium through the pretense of its era, and what the audience expected in said era. An ability to remain enjoyable beyond that, especially by those who have never experienced it firsthand, is but a bonus to a game that fares well in said comparison. To call Diablo old is objective fact. It cannot be disputed. If dated graphics and unbloated sleek gameplay isn't your thing, then Diablo won't be for you. But that does not change the effect it had on the greater gaming environment or the memories of those that played it when it came out. Having said that though, I truly believe that Diablo, like Daggerfall, is unfairly overlooked by modern fans of their respective series. It offers an awesome experience if you are willing to approach the title with an open mind. The design philosophy behind Diablo, the very thing that made it a success far beyond the niche 90s fandom of role-playing gamers, can be best seen on the first screen of the game, its main menu. Diablo had to be easy to understand, so that even non-computer savvy users could start playing and understand the basic gameplay loop. Rather than aim at a hardcore crowd enamored by in-depth character creation screens, spanning storylines and complex game mechanics, Blizzard North targeted as wide an audience as possible. They wanted everyone to be able to play. Diablo was an RPG for the masses. It was all about being easy to pick up. To achieve this, they used an internally dubbed mom test, questioning if a baby boomer mother who hadn't grown up using technology could figure out how to navigate the menu and play the game without reading the manual.
From a UI perspective, can somebody play this without getting any kind of instructions?
Eric Schaefer, co-founder of Blizzard North and co-designer of Diablo, explained how they strove to make the interface as transparent as possible. If you want to open a door, left-click on it. Want to move to a target location? Left-click on it. Want to attack a monster, pick up an item, or talk to a non-playable character? Well, you get the idea. NHL 94 was the unlikely influence behind this decision. Its quick menu system had the player in a game within a few button presses, providing the basis for Diablo's equally speedy start. The team at Blizzard North would spend many of their working hours playing the sports game, going so far as to have company tournaments pitching developers against each other. Quick aside here, much of this research has been made possible through the amazing work of David L. Craddock, whose behind-the-scenes book, Stay a While and Listen, has proven an invaluable resource. Much of the interview quotes from developers referenced herein are from this publication, and if you are interested in learning absolutely everything there is to know about Diablo's development, then it is a must-read. For the sake of brevity, ironic I know, and to respect Craddock's intellectual property, I implore you to grab yourself a copy if this video whets your appetite, as I will be offering only a glimpse into some of the juicier behind-the-scenes revelations found within. As usual, all of my sources can be found linked within the description of the video, and they have been referenced within the written essay itself too, again linked below. By being open to influence outside of the role-playing genre, Blizzard North founders David Brevik and the Schaefer brothers, Eric and Max, aimed to make Diablo everything that RPGs at the time were not, where you could press a few buttons and be straight into the game. No answering a ton of questions or putting numbers into stats that the player doesn't even understand yet. The goal was to get them playing as quickly as possible, with minimal hang-ups. They distilled the essence of an RPG down to its base fundamentals, and created the modern interpretation of the action role-playing game in the process. An ARPG is simply defined as a game with leveling up, choosing character classes, and managing a variety of spells and/or equipment. Like a typical RPG, except it's all done in real time, like an action game. So while not every ARPG is a Diablo clone, it's a fair name for a vast majority of the ones that came out after Diablo, and especially Diablo 2. Clicking New Game, choosing a class, and selecting Play drops us straight into the game proper. No exposition, no needlessly complicated opening plot, just a fiery demon and foreboding music before we find ourselves plonked into the quiet town of Tristram. Our first experience isn't killing monsters or grabbing items, it's the serene sounds of one of the best tracks in gaming history. Matt Ullman's 12-string guitar creates a tone that's simultaneously warm yet ghost-like. This eerily soothing accompaniment immediately sets the tone going forward of a derelict medieval gothic world. Playing as we employ the utility of the town's services, it's meant to make us feel safe. Though it maintains a lingering sense of dread, it soon becomes a familiar friend, providing sanctuary as our hero progresses downwards to the depths of hell. Whenever we need to return to the surface for salvation, it will always be there to greet us, to offer a moment of levity from the oppression of the darkness below. Ullman was the perfect man for the job. Known as a bit of an office clown, he was infamous for slacking off much of the day, choosing to work in furious 2-hour stints, and then relax and pester his colleagues outside of these bursts of creativity. This offered him many hours to playtest early builds, where he devised strategies and had ample time to conceptualize the necessary soundtrack to associate with the onslaught happening on his screen.
He was one of the first people we hired. He was really annoying, but he sent me this mixtape with video game music, and he would call up and he would write, and he would kept pestering us. He was very, very adamant about getting a job. So eventually I just relented. He is a musical genius. I was blown away at how lucky we were to have such a talented artist from the very beginning, and he was a huge influence on kind of the atmosphere of the game in general.
Brevik explained best how music is almost spiritual, a soulful movement that resonates with all of us. Having music that sets a mood will ensure pushing an experience over the top. It can either make or break something. If you were to go into Tristram and hear happy-go-lucky music, it just wouldn't work. It's like a horror movie. It's all about the atmosphere, the music, the sound, and how that creates feeling. Ullman did a perfect job of balancing dark, eerie, moody with a little bit of light. It's got kind of lightness to the tone, but it's also sad, disturbing, and haunting. Ullman approached the score in regards to what it couldn't be rather than what it should be. He explained how it couldn't be too overtly country or bluegrass, or too obviously Latin. He didn't want something that was too faux medieval, so it ended up somewhere in between all of those things.
And I know you've been wondering if we have any big news for you at this event. Well, as it turns out, we do.
Blizzard's 2008 announcement of Diablo 3 saw guitarist Lawrence Juba play those first few chords for a reason. According to Diablo 3's lead composer, Russell Brower, over 10,000 people in the room knew exactly what was coming. Originally dubbed Crossroads, the town of Tristram, a hub whose purpose is entirely for gameplay utility, more closely mimicked a farmer's market in its original iteration, with random townsfolk and wandering merchants walking through offering advice and services. Deciding that the location needed some more permanence, the time came that it had to be populated with buildings. Eric Schaefer, also acting as one of the artists working on the game, designed the Tristram Church based on his travels through Europe. He had taken a liking to Gothic architecture, and using a book of Spanish churches as a reference, he created the grand structure that dominates the upper right of the town map. By happenstance, it was that book that dictated Tristram's geography. The terrain around it in the book was kind of similar to Tristram's grass, rolling but kind of broken up too. That set the tone. Gothic art, a style of medieval art founded in the 12th century and prevailing through into the 16th century, has had more than its fair share of revivals. Its original etymology, that being a synonym for barbarians, the Visigoths that sacked 3rd century Rome and cemented the fate of the Western Roman Empire, perfectly aligns with the reaction it elicits in its purveyors. Its architecture is characterized by vertical proportions, pointed arches, splaying buttresses, and asymmetry, deliberately imposing. While not inherently evil, Gothic's association with horror throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, notably in literature and cinema, made it the clear choice for the artists at Blizzard North. The red light leaking out from the broken stained glass windows and a gaped doorway was an obvious inclusion given the game's premise. Phil Schenk, lead artist on Diablo 2, explained how to him, Diablo was the epitome of conscious art decision. Tristram has this sort of strange, grey, stormy colour scheme to it. It isn't day, it isn't night, it feels like an in-between world. He discovered that despite Diablo's art style impeccably set in its atmosphere, it had happened by chance. I thought those guys were geniuses, but as I got to know them, I discovered that it all kind of happened by the seat of their pants. The town's unique lighting on the knife's edge of dusk, neither day nor night, only came about due to Schaefer playing around with the witch's hut. Positioned across the river, this ramshackle abode of darkened wood, highlighted by a vibrant yellow warmth peering between the planks, was a favourite of Schaefer's. He tweaked the dusky nighttime setting of the scene to make it stand out, and through that, Tristram's ominous time zone was set in stone. Whether it was by pure intention or a happy coincidence, Diablo excels at world building. This dilapidated village is populated by just 8 residents. The empty houses indicate that this wasn't always the case. Walking into town from our spawn location by the river, we come across the town square. Centered within stands the town's water fountain, surrounded by a tavern and a smithy. Nearby, we find the all too familiar Deckard Cain.
Hello, my friend.
Cain had always been intended to be an important figure, a master of wisdom, clearly educated on all things within this doomed world we have found ourselves. He was to be like a father figure to our character, but Brevik never envisioned him becoming such a fan favourite. His iconic
"Stay a while and listen"
has since become synonymous with the name Diablo, and with videos covering the game. What you may not know about the elderly figure is that his name was the result of a fan contest. Promoted through PC Gamer, prospective fans of Blizzard's new RPG were given the opportunity to name one of the characters. Among the many submissions, Deckard Cain found his way into the game.
And some guy sent in the name Deckard Cain. I don't know if it's made up or not, but we're like, damn, that's badass. We're gonna use that.
Brevik may not know, but thanks to the man himself, we do. Posted on Reddit, the namesake of this Diablo icon revealed himself 12 years ago to the fans of the franchise. Deckard Cain Elder was the son of a Blizzard fan. His first name, Deckard, derived from Harrison Ford's Blade Runner character, and Cain from his mother's maiden name. Deckard Elder's father entered the contest as a fan, submitting a postcard with his son's name on it, feeling that the name was unique enough to win. Of course, he was right, and in return, Bill Roper, Diablo's producer, awarded the father and baby with a swag bag bundle, including a copy of Diablo, and assorted merchandise such as a blue statue of Diablo himself that stood a little over a foot tall. It's difficult to see with the resolution of this sprite, but Cain, the video game character, also has a darker complexion. This is hinted to in his lore as he mentions his time in the East, a land distant from the green pastures of Tristram. It wasn't until years later that Craddock was able to confirm from his many interviews with the developers that Deckard Cain is indeed black. Kelly Johnson, an artist, was assigned the job of concepting and designing Cain by Eric Schaefer. His only description was that he was a storyteller. With nothing else to work with, Johnson cited that back in the mid-90s, there were almost no black characters in games. So when I was given the opportunity to make a character, I made him black. For the time, it was considered very radical. Cain, like much of the townsfolk, serves 2 purposes. First most as a source of information pertaining to lore and hints regarding our quest, and secondly, as a utility. In this case being a means to identify any magical item without the need of a scroll or spell. As with many other CRPGs that used similar mechanics, inspired by D&D, magical items dropped within the dungeon are a mystery to the player before they're identified. Seeing as Cain only charges a measly sum of 100 gold per item, and identifying an item is necessary to both activate its magical properties and to raise its price accordingly for selling it, foregoing this simple step will only highlight how extraordinarily cheap you are. Surrounding Old Deckard, we can find Pepin the Healer to the northwest, who will bring our HP back to full for free and acts as a vendor for healing items, namely potions, scrolls, and powerful concoctions of rejuvenation, which fill both of the players with depletable stats. Over by the Tavern of the Rising Sun, ironically named given the dusk-like time zone Tristram finds itself eternally stuck, we can find Ogden, its owner. He will be the first to welcome us back to Tristram, revealing that we are not just a wary traveller passing through, but a returning villager. Giving us the rundown on all that has happened since we left, he makes it clear that the town is indeed no longer safe, and that if we wish to uncover who is endangering our old neighbours, we must visit the Crimson Cathedral on the edge of town. Directly north of the tavern stands Gillian, the barmaid. In the vanilla game, Gillian only acts as a source of information, much like Ogden, although the latter is also able to give us a side quest. In Devolution X, she has been made more useful through the function of a shared storage between alt accounts. You could argue that this is cheating, especially as it's the only case where a change made in the mod is not toggleable, but in reality this is just a huge quality of life upgrade. Those with experience will know that this was always an option in Diablo, as long as you were using an online character and willing to take a gamble. By setting up a Battle.net game, you could enter Tristram with one of your highly leveled characters, drop whatever loot you wish to transfer, and then quickly hop back into the game using a new character you wish to pass the item to. If you were fast enough, you could transfer inventory between the two characters without much issue. If you don't count the game refreshing and wiping the ground items as an issue, that is. To the southeast is everyone's favourite Scottish stereotype, Griswold the Blacksmith. As his name implies, he will be your one-stop shop for anything weaponry and armour. He'll sell you whatever smithed items he has available to him at that time, although usually not in the specific configuration and definitely not the price that you might hope for. He'll buy most of your loot for a generous return depending on their magical properties, and importantly is the only means for rogues and sorcerers to repair their items. If an item breaks, it becomes unusable, so keeping your equipment in tip-top form should remain a priority. The last character found near the town square is the sad case of the local drunkard, Farnham. A dark mix of comic relief and a somber reality of the effects of trauma on those unfortunate enough to bear witness to and be involved in twisted atrocities that no human is prepared to encounter. The voice acting alone is enough to convey that message. Most times he's nothing more than a means to lighten the mood of Diablo's world.
That other ale ain't no good since those stupid dogs. You drink water?
But at other times, he only strengthens why this game is so dark.
Liar! Liar! They're all dead! Dead! Their blood's spilling out all over the floor! All his fault!
Speaking of voice acting, Blizzard knocked it out of the park with this one. We've seen before on this channel how a poor implementation of voice acting can harshly damage the intended tone of gaming horror, and thankfully Diablo didn't make the same blunder. Deckard Cain alone could carry the whole franchise on his back. Michael Goh, a legend in the voice acting world, whose credits list is awe-inspiringly long, gave this most important NPC the gravitas needed to motivate the player to face hell itself in the quest of vanquishing evil. The narrator, who reads the lore books found in the depths below and narrates some cutscenes, too maintains a level of solemnity required to take the dark tone of the game seriously. There is always the risk of trying too hard to be edgy, being too close to the precipice of cringe, where writings such as the lore found in Diablo could be considered over the top and corny, opposed to ominous and sinister. For the most part, Diablo is able to skirt around this. However, there are certain blocks of dialogue that one can see as overacted, particularly that of the witch Adria, who leans too much into the Wicked Witch of the West style evilness in her lines.
The Butcher is a sadistic creature that delights in the torture and pain of others. You have seen his handiwork in the drunkard Farnham.
It's a little too close to the stage performances of a pantomime for my liking. Not everyone was happy with the portrayals in-game. PC Zone reviewer Zablack rightfully highlighted the stereotypical inclusion of English and Scottish accents, often associated with fantasy, likely due to Tolkien's work and its many derivatives that permeate high fantasy world design to this day. Zablack did, however, also criticize Go's performance as an appalling Sean Connery impression, so he is overly harsh in my opinion. Maybe it's nostalgia, but I see no such schlocky imitation behind Kane's performance myself. Evidently, the crowds that once visited Tristram disappeared when evil began tormenting the town, or they were scared off shortly thereafter. The only remaining villagers are those who benefit financially from staying or are too stubborn to leave. Outside of town, we find two more residents. To the north, near the mountains, is the sole surviving child, Wirt. While alive, he has sustained a grave injury, a dismembered leg, relying on a wooden peg as a replacement. The sarcastic teenager is smart enough to know he should move on and leave this area before all is lost, but not wanting to miss out on a promising business opportunity, he can see the value in staying to wring out whatever gold he can, specifically gold from us. The townsfolk are rightly saddened at Wirt's situation. His mother had recently passed away from a broken heart due to the boy's injury, and they can't help but notice the recent shift in his demeanor. A blackened soul bare of happiness, now only obsessed with gold. For a price, Wirt will sell high-level magical loot, far more powerful than what his direct competitor Griswold can offer, the trade-off being that he only sells a very limited inventory, and you can't guarantee it will be something you want until you have already paid the upfront price to have such privilege. There's also the problem with the items being astronomically expensive. Wirt is very serious about hoarding as much as he can before he makes his getaway. In the early game, Wirt is best ignored, seeing as most players will find themselves unable to buy the items in the first place. Not to mention that both Wirt's and Griswold's inventories are level scaled. The higher the player level, the better the items you will see. It simply isn't worth your time or effort to spend thousands of gold on an item that will be outclassed in around 1 to 3 hours of playing. Finally, we come to the sorcerer class's best friend, Adria the Witch, living by her hut in the east of the map. She'll buy any unwanted staves and sell you new ones, as well as mana potions, scrolls, and books. Early in development, it was even intended for the player to be able to upgrade their scrolls and potions to be more potent. Potions could be boosted by finding certain reagents for Adria to concoct with.
I believe that I could brew better potions if you could just find me the correct reagents.
And scrolls could be combined to double their strength or create a spell book that unlocks a permanent spell instead.
Remember, with enough scrolls, I can create a book of magic for you.
There's a ton of cut content, some of which arguably could make the game even greater than it is, and we'll be covering all of it as we examine every facet of Diablo. Adria's mana potions are vital for spellcasters. The limited mana pool will have the player chugging replenishing potions like no tomorrow, so don't be surprised when you find yourself running over the river to visit her every time we're in town. Her staves can be useful, although I tend to prefer using a melee weapon instead, even on a sorcerer. The magical abilities applied to melee weapons and shields usually make them a smarter choice than the allure of casting a spell without having to use any mana. At any rate, scrolls can perform the same job of a stave, and won't take up so much inventory space. This is an optional quality of life improvement, but you can also set Adria to automatically fill your mana similar to Pepin the Healer's health mechanic. It saves you a few gold, and seeing as Pepin already provides a free means of refilling health, it makes sense to me for Adria to be able to do the same for mana. Speaking of quality of life, as you spend a significant amount of time in this small town, an estimated 10% of your playthrough, it won't be long until you find the walk from the town square over to Adria's hut as an annoying time sink. Having said that, this brief moment of peace combined with Tristram's tranquil music is also welcome at times. Still, the means to run around at double the base game speed makes using a mod like Devolution X worth it alone. Even the expansion pack, Hellfire, made the wise decision of implementing a run feature for traveling around town. reviews did point out one flaw with Tristram, and that's how stagnant it is. Computer Gaming World touched upon how the small village doesn't feel so much like a community with living people as it does a pit stop where you restock on health, mana, and weaponry. Except for the additional lore and quest hints one can obtain from chatting with the townsfolk, this is a purely utilitarian experience with little feeling of life. The town exists to please the player only, especially with some characters like Ogden and Gillian serving for the most part as set dressing. We now approach ARPGs expecting this. Gameplay is focused around combat and progression, with immersion into a living world coming as a distant second. But in 1997, CRPGs were expected to closely emulate the imagination of a tabletop dungeon master, rather than exist purely as a stagnant video game. Reviewer Greg Fortune continues, "We get a good feel for Tristram's backstory when we read the manual, but not when we play the game. It just doesn't feel like a real town. Instead of just showing Griswold standing outside his shop, they could have let us go inside and see him forging and fixing weapons, or go into the tavern, bought a drink and talk to Gillian the barmaid about the town's troubles." This may sound like high expectations, but the competition was doing exactly this. Ultima 7 and 8, Arena and Daggerfall, and Wizardry 7, among others, had this level of interactivity, so it's fair to understand his criticism. Fortune may have been pleased to find out that his intuition was shared by the developers. At one point in development, Tristram was originally planned to be larger, featuring a general store for equipment and repairs, whose function was implemented on Griswold instead, and with a temple for healing, which was replaced by Pepin. Certain townsfolk wouldn't remain static either. Unused walk cycle animations for the blacksmith, innkeeper, and barmaid imply that they would have moved around the village. As we'll soon see with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that the huge worlds seen in the competition wasn't the objective behind Diablo anyway. It was never intended to mimic the complexity of those other titles from the time. Well, I can't stay away from it any longer. Diablo is an ARPG after all, and so far we haven't had any A. It's time to sink into the meat and potatoes of this classic game. We need to check out that demonic cathedral. Walking over, we stumble across the gory figure of a dismembered villager splayed across the graveyard outside.
Now everyone is dead, killed by a demon he called the Butcher. Avenge us!
Well, you might find him. Diablo uses an abundance of randomization features, all with the goal of endless replayability. One of these randomized features being side quests, with each new game pulling from a pool of handmade quests to create a unique experience. Which means that this poor fella won't always be there, but he is so iconic I can't help but mention him, even if on my first ever playthrough years ago, he was nowhere to be seen.